The air that October morning in Chicago carried a kind of sharp, restless chill, the sort that makes every sound feel a little clearer, a little closer. At the Grand Riverside Estate, a crowd of strangers gathered in quiet anticipation, drawn to the promise of forgotten treasures. Some came for bargains, others for curiosity. But one woman moved with a different purpose. Sophia Martinez, an antique dealer with a patient eye and a steady heart, drifted through the rooms of the sprawling Tudor-style mansion. She had done this countless times before, sorting memory from clutter, separating what mattered from what merely occupied space. Yet even she could not ignore the quiet weight that lingered in these halls. The Williamson family had lived here for nearly a century. Now the last heir, Margaret Williamson, was gone. No children, no living relatives to guard these walls. And so, their lives were reduced to little paper tags and silent bids. Have you ever stood among the belongings of someone you never knew and felt them watching? In the dim wood-paneled library, Sophia found herself drawn to a heavy mahogany desk. There, arranged with almost ceremonial care, lay a collection of framed photographs, family portraits spanning decades, smiling graduates, formal wedding parties, holiday gatherings, frozen in silver and sepia. But one photograph refused to be ignored. Its ornate silver frame was darkened with age, as though the years themselves had been trying to hide it. The image within belonged to another time. The clothing, the soft tonal quality of the print, it could only be the early 1920s. A young couple sat poised in what seemed to be their parlor. The man wore a neat three-piece suit, a pocket watch chain glinting faintly. His hair slicked back in perfect fashion hinted at wealth and careful upbringing. Beside him, a woman in a graceful drop-waist dress rested her hands gently on a bundle in her lap. Her smile was delicate, almost shy, the kind you might miss if you blinked. In her arms lay an infant, no more than 6 months old, wrapped in a christening gown of fine white lace. It was the sort of garment only families of means could afford, made for special blessings and quiet celebrations. At first glance, the photograph radiated everything the Roaring Twenties promised: prosperity, contentment, a future unfolding like a bright new decade. But if you've ever looked at a picture long enough to feel it looking back, you'll know what Sophia felt next. Something in the baby's face refused to rest. The parents' smiles were warm, proud, perfectly staged. Yet the infant's eyes, they held an intensity no camera should have captured. Not the vacant, dreamy gaze of early life. No, these were eyes that seemed to know, to sense, to fear. Have you ever seen a look so young and yet so terribly old? Sophia hesitated, the quiet of the library pressing in. Then, almost without thinking, she purchased the photograph for $25. She told herself it was simply a valuable piece of history. But deep down, she knew she was carrying something more, something that wanted to be found. Back in her antique shop in Lincoln Park, evening settled over the city in long amber streaks. Sophia laid the photograph on her work table and carefully removed it from its tarnished frame. Years of experience had taught her that the true stories of old photographs often lived not on the front, but on the back. Names, dates, studio stamps, the faint handwriting of someone long gone. And there it was, an embossed mark, Henryk Kowalski, Photography Studio, Chicago, Illinois. Beneath it, a date written in elegant script, October 15th, 1920. and just below in a different hand, 3 names: Robert Catherine and baby Thomas Williamson. Sophia's pulse quickened. Henryk Kowalski. She knew that name. In the glittering Chicago of the 1920s, Kowalski had been the portrait photographer of the city's wealthiest families. His studio was famous not only for its artistry, but for his meticulous records. If those archives still survived, they might hold something precious, perhaps even notes from the very session that captured this unsettling image. Would they explain the child's strange expression, or only deepen the mystery? 2 hours slipped away as Sophia combed through digital archives, old directories, and fragile newspaper scans. Each click of a key felt like opening a hidden door. She found them pieces of a life now reduced to records and headlines. Robert Williamson, a powerful banker, respected among Chicago's financial elite. Catherine Williamson, née Hartford, descended from railroad wealth that had shaped the Midwest itself. Their marriage was a union of money and influence, the sort of alliance that defined an era. And then came the final name, the smallest one, Thomas, a Chicago Tribune obituary buried in the brittle pages of November 1920. Sophia read it twice before she believed it. Baby Thomas Williamson, gone only 1 month after the photograph was taken. A perfect little life, captured once and lost forever. What had those dark, knowing eyes seen in their brief time here? And why did it feel as though across the distance of a century, they were still trying to speak? The official record gave a name to the loss, but not a reason. Sudden infant death syndrome. 3 clinical words, cold and spare, standing in for the unknowable. In 1920, doctors had only the faintest understanding of such tragedies. They called it SIDS because they had nothing else to call it. But as Sophia stared once more at the photograph, the term felt like a shadow, something meant to hide, not explain. Now that she knew baby Thomas would be gone within mere weeks of this captured moment, his tiny, intent gaze seemed to burn even brighter. Could a camera capture a warning? Had the lens caught something that human eyes were never meant to see? Have you ever wondered if an old photograph can hold more than just light and shadow? Something alive. Something waiting. Sophia reached for her phone, the weight of the picture still pressing against her fingertips. There was only one person she trusted to help unravel this. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a historian of early photography at Northwestern University and a scholar of the strange little truths a camera can sometimes reveal. I have a 1920 Kowalski portrait that's unusual, Sophia said softly when Dr. Chen answered. The baby's expression? It doesn't match the parents at all. It's almost as if the child is seeing something the adults can't. There was a pause, then a spark of interest on the other end of the line. Bring it in tomorrow morning, Dr. Chen replied. Henryk Kowalski had a way of catching things others missed. His portraits often reveal more than his subjects intended. The next morning, a pale autumn sun followed Sophia to the university. Dr. Chen's office felt less like an academic workspace and more like a private museum. Shelves gleamed with vintage cameras from every era, while the walls displayed nearly 2 centuries of faces' eyes staring back from silver plates and faded prints. It smelled faintly of old paper and quiet electricity, a place where time itself seemed to hesitate. Kowalski, Dr. Chen murmured as she carefully set the photograph beneath a pool of specialized light. He was an interesting figure in Chicago's photography scene. Arrived from Poland in 1910 and quickly built a reputation for portraits that seemed to capture a person's inner essence, their hidden self, rather than just their appearance. Through a magnifier, the historian studied every inch of the image. Her breath slowed. "The technical quality is exceptional," she said at last. "Even for Kowalski. Look at the depth of field, the way the fabric of the mother's dress catches light, the delicate lace of the baby's christening gown. This is craftsmanship at its finest." Sophia leaned closer as Dr. Chen shifted the equipment to focus on the baby's face. "What strikes you as unusual?" she asked. "Several things," Dr. Chen replied, her tone sharpening. "Babies this young, 4 to 6 months perhaps, have very limited expressions. They smile reflexively, they cry, they drift into sleep. But this child appears to be concentrating, focusing on something specific, and not at the camera." She adjusted the light, narrowing in on the tiny eyes. "Look here. The direction of his gaze, not at the parents, not at Kowalski. Something just left of the camera's range. Could it be a sound?" Sophia asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "Possibly," Dr. Chen allowed. "But notice the expression itself. This isn't mere curiosity. It isn't a startled look. If I had to name it, I'd say it looks like weariness, maybe even fear." The words settled into the room like dust. Sophia felt the weight of them, heavy and unshakable. Dr. Chen continued, her eyes narrowing as she examined the shadows. "There's another detail. Kowalski was known for his use of natural light. Soft, careful, elegant. But here she pointed to faint overlapping shadows. There are multiple light sources, strong ones. See how the shadow falls across the mother's sleeve. That suggests a bright, focused light coming from the same direction the baby is staring." "What kind of light?" Sophia asked. "Hard to say with certainty. It doesn't match the gentle daylight Kowalski preferred. It feels intrusive, as if something bright, maybe a lamp, maybe a reflection, was positioned just outside the frame." Dr. Chen leaned back, removing her glasses in a slow, deliberate motion. Sophia recognized the gesture. It meant the historian had reached a thought she wasn't sure she wanted to share. "In my experience," Dr. Chen said softly, "when a baby this young shows such a specific focused expression, they're reacting to something immediate, something present in the room. The question is, what was there that we can't see?" Sophia hesitated, the truth clinging to her like static. "The baby died a month later," she said finally. "Sudden infant death syndrome according to the records." Dr. Chen's eyes darkened. "That changes everything. In 1920, SIDS was barely understood. Many infant deaths that may have had other causes were simply labeled. Sometimes to hide illness, sometimes to hide other things." She let the thought hang in the quiet air. Her gaze returned to the photograph. Combined with the child's expression, with the strange light, the unanswered questions thickened like fog. "I think," she said at last, "we need to know more about this family. Much more." That night, and for several nights after, Sophia buried herself in the hushed stacks of the Chicago History Museum. Each page she turned seemed to echo a little too loudly in the empty research room. Somewhere in those brittle records, she hoped the Williamson family had left a trail, one that could explain a look too knowing for a child and a death too sudden to accept. But as the hours slipped past, and the archives whispered their half-forgotten names, she could not shake a single uninvited thought. What if the baby had seen something in that room, and what if it was still waiting to be found? The records of the Williamson family painted at first glance a picture of perfect Chicago wealth in the dazzling 1920s. Charity events, business announcements, society page photographs of soirees by the lake. On the surface, it was all elegance and order, the kind of life that appears polished enough to hide anything. But old paper always tells its secrets if you stay long enough to listen. As Sophia pressed deeper into the archives, the sheen began to crack. Robert Williamson, once described in glowing terms as a respected banker, was far more than a quiet man of finance. Documents from 1919 and 1920 tied his name to a series of shadowed investment schemes that investigators would later whisper about as fraud. Families had lost life savings. Complaints were filed. And though Robert was never charged, his name surfaced again and again, like a dark shape beneath still water. Have you ever noticed how the wealthiest scandals rarely leave fingerprints? Only rumors thick enough to choke a room. The family's private life proved no less uneasy. Hospital records revealed that Catherine Williamson had been admitted twice in 1920 for what doctors delicately labeled nervous exhaustion. A polite phrase, a velvet curtain over something raw. Today we might call it severe depression, anxiety, perhaps something harder to name. But the most chilling discovery came not from a medical file, but from a single clipped notice buried in the Chicago Tribune Society section, November 1920. Following the tragic loss of their infant son Thomas, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Williamson have announced their intention to travel abroad indefinitely. Mrs. Williamson's physician has recommended a change of climate for her health. Sophia read the sentence again and again. Abroad, indefinitely. Only weeks after their child's death. As though flight could silence a grief too sharp to contain, Cook County property records told the next chapter in brittle ink. The Williamson home on North Lake Shore Drive sold in December of that same year, just 2 months after the portrait had been taken, 1 month after the funeral. The sale was handled quietly, and at a price far below its worth, as if the house itself had become unbearable. But the archives held one more wound. In the genealogy section of the public library, Sophia found a record almost too cruel to believe. Thomas had not been their first child. 2 years earlier in 1918, Catherine had given birth to a daughter named Mary. Murray lived only 8 months. The cause of death, sudden infant death syndrome. 2 children, 2 deaths, both before their first birthdays, both hidden behind the same vague explanation that doctors of the era barely understood. Sophia closed her eyes, the image of baby Thomas returning unbidden. Those watchful eyes, that tiny face carrying an expression too knowing for its age. Could a child sense danger even before it arrived? And if he could, what had he seen in that quiet room the day the photograph was taken? Her next discovery felt almost like an invitation. The Williamson house itself still stood, converted into luxury condominiums in the 1980s, but the bones of the old home remained. And one unit, the very space where the portrait had likely been made, was now owned by a pediatrician named Dr. Amanda Foster. Sophia called her heart beating fast. "I'm researching a 1920 photograph of the Williamson family," Sophia explained. "Their history, it's tragic. I'd love to see where the portrait was taken." Sometimes standing in the space reveals things a picture can't. There was a brief silence, then a voice, warm but edged with curiosity. "Of course," Dr. Foster replied. "But I should warn you there are some unusual aspects of this apartment. Given what you are investigating, you may find them interesting." The limestone building on North Lake Shore Drive greeted Sophia with a quiet dignity that masked its age. Inside, Dr. Foster's condominium occupied the entire third floor. Renovated, polished, but still breathing echoes of another century. As the doctor led her through the high-ceilinged rooms, Sophia could almost hear the faint clink of crystal glasses, the soft shuffle of servants long gone. Large windows opened toward Lake Michigan, the same cold water the Williamsons had once gazed upon. Success still lingered in the architecture, even if happiness had long since fled. "This is the living room," Dr. Foster said, gently ushering Sophia into a spacious room with restored crown molding and gleaming hardwood floors. "This is almost certainly where your photograph was taken. I've tried to preserve the historical character while making it livable." Sophia carefully removed the photograph from her bag. Despite modern furnishings and updated lighting, she recognized the bones of the room, the placement of the windows, the angle of the light, even the very corner where the Williamson family had once posed. It was as if the past had only stepped into another room waiting. "When I bought this place 15 years ago," Dr. Foster continued, "I researched its history. The Williamson tragedy was part of what drew me here. As a pediatrician, I couldn't help but be intrigued by the mystery of those infant deaths." "Mystery?" Sophia asked softly. Dr. Foster nodded, her expression darkening. "In my career, I've seen thousands of cases of infant mortality. SIDS does occur, but 2 deaths in the same family within 2 years. That is extremely rare. Modern medicine would investigate relentlessly." She crossed to a bookshelf and retrieved a thin folder. "After I moved in, I found a few things the previous owners had left behind. Documents, photographs, even some personal items forgotten in the basement for decades." Sophia's heart began to race. Dr. Foster opened the folder with careful hands. Inside lay yellowed household bills, personal correspondence, and one letter whose very presence seemed to tremble in the air. A letter from Catherine Williamson to her sister, dated November 20th, 1920, just 5 days after baby Thomas's death. "May I?" Sophia whispered. Dr. Foster nodded. The paper was fragile. The ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Shaky, desperate, as if each word had been carved out of grief. "Dearest Margaret, I cannot bear to stay in this house another day. Thomas is gone just like Mary. And I know in my heart that Robert..." The next words dissolved into an unfinished scrawl, the sentence collapsing as though the writer's courage had failed. "I cannot write the words, but you know what I suspect." Sophia felt the room tilt as though the air itself had shifted. The photograph in her bag seemed to grow heavier, as if baby Thomas, those dark, knowing eyes, had been waiting for her to read this all along. What had Catherine suspected? What secret had she nearly spoken but stopped herself from revealing? And if the truth had been buried in 1920, was it still waiting somewhere in the quiet bones of this house? There are stories that seem to have lain dormant in the dust of time, but with just a trembling letter, a faint stain on the wall, everything awakens like a sigh from the past. Sophia closed the old letter Catherine Williamson's words still vibrating on her fingertips like a whisper from 1920. Dearest Margaret Catherine had written to her sister Thomas is gone, as is Mary. And in my heart I know, Robert, I cannot continue. But you know what I fear. The doctor had given the same cause of death as Mary. But Catherine saw the look Robert gave the children when he thought no one was watching. That look, cold, sharp as a knife. Catherine had found a bottle of laudanum hidden in her husband's study, too much for the pain as he had said. The night Thomas died, Robert had been in the boy's room for more than an hour before calling for help. When Catherine touched the baby's skin, it was so cold it froze her heart. Very cold. Cold to the bone, Catherine wrote. Sophia's hands trembled uncontrollably as she read this. She looked up at Dr. Amanda Foster, the current owner of the old apartment, and saw her nod silently. There's more, the doctor said softly, as if afraid to wake something sleeping in this wall. I think you should see the room that used to be the nursery. They walked down the hall to a room that had been converted into Dr. Foster's office. This is Thomas's room, she said, pointing to a carefully preserved wall behind glass. When I was renovating, I found something strange behind the original wallpaper. Something the previous owners had never touched. Look closely at this pattern. Sophia moved closer. The delicate 1920s pattern still had its gentleness. But when she looked closely, she noticed small dark dots like the prints of a child's fingertips. Tiny fingers. Right up to the height of a crib. That's not all, Dr. Foster continued, her voice low. She led Sophia to another corner of the wall where larger, more unusual stains lay hidden beneath the pattern. I sent these to be tested just out of curiosity, she said. They were positive for laudanum. Sophia paused, feeling as if the room were closing in around her. You think Robert Williamson poisoned his own children? I can't say for sure, Dr. Foster said slowly. But 2 deaths from SIDS in the same family within 2 years is extremely unusual. With that much laudanum, a father like Robert could have made it look like a sudden illness. Dr. Foster took out another piece of paper, a torn diary entry hidden behind a loose board. On October 10th, 1920, Catherine wrote in increasingly desperate handwriting, Thomas has been sleeping unusually much lately. When I mentioned it, Robert got angry and said I was worrying too much like I did with Mary. But I saw him give Thomas what he called medicine, and the child fell into a deep sleep. I found the little brown bottle in Robert's study just like the one he had when Mary was sick. He said it was medicine for backaches, but I never saw him take it. There were scratches on the bottle, like measuring marks. I will be on watch tonight. I will protect Thomas even if I have to. The line ended abruptly, as if Catherine had been cut off in the middle of her vows. Sophia clutched the paper, the image of the old portrait flashing through her mind, little Thomas's eyes too old, too tired to be a child. He wasn't looking into the lens. He was looking at his father. Babies are more sensitive than we think, Dr. Foster whispered. If Robert really did poison his child, Thomas would have learned to associate his father's presence with pain and fear. That look wasn't an accident. Spurred by her determination, Sophia knew she had to find the final piece of evidence. The clue led her to the Chicago Photographic Archives, where the entire files of the photographer, Henryk Kowalski, the man who took the fateful portrait, were kept. Inside the cool basement of Columbia, Dr. Marcus Webb, the archivist in charge of the archives, led Sophia through rows of wooden shelves filled with meticulous notebooks. Kowalski was known for his detailed notes, not only of his technique, but also of his personal impressions of his clients. He explains, when the 1920 notebook was opened and turned to the October pages, Sophia held her breath. Perhaps with just a few lines from a seemingly ordinary photo session, the Williamson family secret would be revealed, or remain hidden in the shadows for another century. In photographer Kowalski's meticulous notebook, the October 1920 page appears like a window into the past. The slanted but neat handwriting reads October 15, 1920. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Williamson with their infant son Thomas. Family portrait commissioned for holiday cards. $50 advance. Technical notes, natural light from east-facing window, added reflector. Mrs. Williamson appeared very nervous throughout the session, constantly checking on the child. Mr. Williamson was impatient, wanting to finish quickly. Personal observations, unusual family dynamics. Child appeared restless whenever father approached. Mrs. W was fiercely protective of the child, would not allow her husband to hold the child during the shoot. Child was healthy, but unusually alert and alert for his age. Requested to reshoot on another day when the child was calmer, but Mr. W insisted on taking the photo immediately. Final notes in the last shoot. The child became frightened when the father approached. The recorded expression showed obvious fear. Mrs. W requested that some poses be removed from the final set. Sophia read each word, and a chill ran down her spine. Even the photographer had noticed something strange in the child's eyes and the way he avoided his father. But there was more. Dr. Webb continued to search through the files and brought out a thin envelope in which was a letter from Catherine Williamson to Kowalski, dated November 25th, 1920, 10 days after Thomas's death. Dear Mr. Kowalski, the letter began, I am writing to request the return of all the photographs and negatives from the October shoot. My husband asked me to take them because our son recently passed away. But I have a personal request for you. If you observe anything unusual during the shoot, anything that may concern the safety of my family, please make a note of it and keep it safe. I fear that one day it may become important. I am enclosing payment for an additional set of photographs which you are requested to keep in your personal files. Do not disclose this to my husband. Sincerely, Catherine Williamson. P.S. My son's eyes in the last photograph. You have captured something important. Please preserve it. Sophia dropped the letter, her heart pounding. A mother imprisoned in fear, leaving a distress signal for a stranger, as if Catherine knew she was walking in the dark, where every piece of evidence could be erased. What Sophia had found was more than a family tragedy. It could be evidence of a crime that had lain dormant for more than a century. She knew she couldn't keep quiet. Sophia contacted Detective Maria Santos of the Chicago Police Department's Cold Case Unit and told her everything she had found. In the warm light of the antique shop, Detective Santos listened quietly. The portrait Catherine's letter, the laudanum stains in the nursery, the unfinished diary, and now the files from the photo studio. Each detail, like a piece of ice, came together to form a picture of the perpetrator. Of course, Santos said quietly, we can't prosecute a case from 1920. But investigatively, this is a classic case of what we now call a family annihilator. A person who destroys his own family, usually for money or power. She took the photograph, looking longingly at little Thomas's eyes. Child murders in those days were rarely investigated thoroughly, especially when the suspect was from the upper class. Laudanum, the opium mixed with alcohol that was widely used, was almost undetectable by the medical science of the 1920s. The inspector turned on his computer, typing quickly into modern databases. Within minutes, a string of data appeared on the screen that left them both speechless. Robert Williamson had remarried in 1925 to a wealthy widow named Helen Morrison, with whom he had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The son died in 1926, aged 6, from pneumonia, the cause of which was given as pneumonia. The daughter died in 1927, aged 4, with a vague diagnosis, wasting disease. By 1928, Helen herself had died reportedly of grief and failing health. Sophia said softly, almost breathlessly, "He did it all again." "It seems so," Santos replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. By 1930, Robert Williamson had inherited a large fortune from his second wife and moved to California. He lived comfortably until his death in 1954. No remarriage, no more children. She closed the computer, her voice dropping to a finality. "What you found is the fingerprints of a serial killer. Someone who took advantage of his social status and the medical limitations of the time to kill his own children, his stepchildren, and perhaps his wife, all to shore up his finances." Sophia looked back at the portrait, where little Thomas's eyes were still wide with fatigue and alertness. A child who couldn't speak yet, but his eyes told the whole story. Perhaps Thomas understood, in a way only small souls can, that his father was the greatest threat in that magnificent house. There are moments when an old photograph seems to know more than the people living in it. The child in the portrait seemed to have sensed the approaching danger. It was as if the lens that day had captured the moment a young soul encountered evil that the adults around him did not see, or deliberately did not want to see. Have you ever looked at a family photograph and felt like something was wrong? As Sophia's discovery spread through the historian and photographer world, an unexpected phone call came. The caller was Dr. Patricia Williamson, a retired psychiatrist living in Portland, Oregon. Her voice was shaky but determined. She introduced herself as the great-granddaughter of Catherine Williamson, the central figure in the portrait, and had spent years investigating the family mystery. "I've always wondered what happened to Catherine after she left Chicago in 1920, she said slowly. "Perhaps your research has finally brought me the answers I've been looking for." They arranged to meet in Chicago the following week. When they arrived, Dr. Patricia brought with her an old box filled with family documents, passed down through the generations, letters and pieces of paper that Catherine had sent to her sister Margaret over the years. And among those mementos was something that silenced the room: Catherine's entire diary, sent piece by piece to Margaret between 1920 and 1925. Can you imagine a diary torn up, smuggled in piece by piece as if Catherine herself were trying to send a signal from the shadows? The pages revealed the chilling story of a woman gradually coming to the horrifying truth: her husband was the murderer of her child. But Catherine was trapped by the constraints of the times. Laws, public opinion, suffocating norms that kept her cries from escaping. The diary entry for October 15, 1920, the day the fateful photograph was taken, sends a chill down the spine. Catherine writes, "Today we went for a portrait session. I insisted on having Thomas in the picture despite Robert's objections. He said the baby would spoil the formality. But I wanted to keep a memory, a testament to Thomas still being with me. Lately, I've been worried about his health. During the session, I saw Robert's face as he watched Thomas. It was that look, cold, calculating, as if he were looking at a math problem to be solved, not at his own child. The photographer, Mr. Kowalski, was very kind. He seemed to notice Thomas's fear whenever Robert approached. When I asked to take a few pictures of just me and Thomas, Robert got angry, but Mr. Kowalski quietly supported me. I pray that Thomas will get better, but deep down, I'm scared. I'm scared that Robert sees his own child as an obstacle to something he wants more than anything. Do you shudder reading the seemingly calm lines that are so heavy with ominousness? Catherine continued to write. The days after Thomas's sudden death, each word like blood flowing on the paper. On November 20th, 1920, she wrote, "Tonight I confronted Robert about the strange medicine. He was angry, saying I was having another nervous attack. But I smelled the strange, sweet smell of the remaining powder. He said it was just an old medicine for headaches. But I knew he was lying. I cannot stay in this house. I cannot pretend to mourn beside the man who killed my children. Tomorrow, I will take what little money I have, leave and go to Margaret. Robert can keep his property, keep his reputation. I just need to get rid of him before I become the next obstacle myself." Have you ever wondered how brave a woman in 1920 must have been to write those words when the whole society was on the side of that powerful man? 6 months after Sophia's initial discovery, the Williamson case became a topic of study across universities. The seemingly harmless portrait is now considered a rare piece of evidence for a crime in the early 20th century. Dr. Chen organized a special conference at Northwestern University called Photography as Historical Evidence, the case of the 1920 Williamson portrait. Scholars came from all over to see how an old photograph could hide a truth that would take a century to realize. On the podium, Sophia stood before the enlarged photo, little Thomas's eyes following the entire audience. Her voice echoed slowly. This photograph teaches us that the truth always finds a way to survive. Although the powerful seek to bury it, it waits silently until someone is willing to look at it. Thomas Williamson, the child who could not speak, could not defend himself, let his eyes tell the story of survival for more than a century. In the audience, Dr. Patricia Williamson quietly wiped away tears. When the conference ended, she approached Sophia and handed her an old envelope, Catherine's last letter written before she died. Catherine lived until 1965, never remarried, never had any more children. She spent her life helping abused women and children, but never spoke publicly about her own horror. She kept the portrait until her last day, along with all the evidence against Robert. Sophia asked softly, "Why did she never call the police?" Patricia just shook her head slightly. In those days, the words of a woman against a respected banker who would believe Catherine knew she would be laughed at. Instead, she kept all the evidence, hoping that one day someone would understand. Sophia opened the envelope with a trembling hand. In it, Catherine's last words seemed to echo from the past to the one who found the truth. "My children were murdered by their own father, and I was helpless. I carried this secret for 45 years, only hoping that one day justice would come. If you are reading this, it means Thomas's eyes have finally been heard. Please remember my child is innocent and loved. Please remember evil sometimes wears a respectable face, but the truth always finds a way to survive. Thank you for seeing what I saw. Thank you for listening to my child's silent testimony. Can you hear that sigh? A sigh that has traveled across nearly half a century to reach the reader. As the room emptied, Sophia sat there looking up at the portrait. Thomas's eyes, no longer a mystery, had told the story. The photograph that once conjured up the image of a happy family now stands as a timeless testament to truth and a reminder to listen to those who cannot speak. Today, the Williamson portrait is prominently displayed at the Chicago History Museum. Visitors often linger long before the child's gaze. Some whisper that they feel as if Thomas is looking directly at them. Now, at least we know what the little boy is trying to say.